You've heard of the TH400. You've heard of the Power Glide. You know about the Torqueflite and the C6. But when Chevy guys wanted something bulletproof that didn't shift itself, they went here. The Muncie M22, the Rock Crusher. This wasn't just a 4-speed transmission. This was the manual that earned a nickname from the sound it made, outlasted the automatics that were supposed to replace it, and became so legendary that people still build brand new ones today. You think you know why they called it the Rock Crusher? Think again. Stick around, because that story is going to completely change everything you thought you knew about this transmission. Part 1. The manual muscle era. Let's set the stage. Early 1960s. America was falling in love with automatic transmissions. They were convenient, smooth, and frankly, most people preferred them. But real street racers? They still rode their own gears. If you wanted to be taken seriously at the local drag strip or the Friday night cruise, you needed 3 pedals and a stick shift. Automatics were for your grandmother's Buick, not your muscle car. General Motors had a problem. They were buying 4-speed transmissions from Borg Warner, the T10, but they needed something stronger for the big block engines they were developing. In 1963, GM introduced their answer, the Muncie 4-speed. Built in Muncie, Indiana, this transmission was GM's attempt to bring 4-speed production in-house and create something better than anything else available. The Muncie came in 3 flavors. The M20 was the wide ratio version with a 2.5 2-to-1 first gear, perfect for street driving and getting heavy cars moving from a stop. The M21 was the close ratio performance version with a 2.2 to 1 first gear. This kept you in the power band between shifts, making it ideal for racing where staying on the cam mattered. And then there was the M22. The M22 Rock Crusher was introduced in 1965, originally developed for Chevrolet's factory racing efforts, including the Corvette Grand Sport program. This wasn't just another gear ratio. This was a completely different approach to transmission design. While the M20 and M21 used helical cut gears like every other transmission, the M22 used gears with a much shallower helical angle, almost straight cut. Straight cut gears are stronger. They can handle more torque without braking, but they come with a price. They're loud, really loud. But GM didn't care about noise. They cared about strength because the engines they were building were about to get seriously powerful. Part 2. The engineering behind the noise. Here's what made the M22 different from every other 4-speed on the planet. Those nearly straight-cut gears weren't just stronger. They were engineered specifically to handle the massive torque of GM's biggest engines. Normal helical gears have teeth cut at about a 30-degree angle. This makes them quiet and smooth, but it also creates thrust forces that try to push the gears apart under load. The M22's gears were cut at a much shallower angle, maybe 8 to 10 degrees. This reduced the thrust forces dramatically, making the transmission stronger, but it also made it sound like a rock quarry in operation. The gear whine was distinctive. Especially in first and second gear, it would produce this mechanical howl that could be heard from blocks away. If you heard that whine, you knew the guy next to you wasn't running a 6-cylinder grocery getter, but the noise was just the beginning. The M22 also got a 1-inch countershaft pin bore instead of the 7/8 inch used in other Muncies. The gears themselves were shot-peened for additional strength. Everything about this transmission was overbuilt. The input shaft, the output shaft, the case itself. It was all designed to handle punishment that would destroy lesser transmissions. Early M22s used a 10-spline input shaft and 27-spline output shaft. Later versions got upgraded to a 26-spline input and 32-spline output for even more strength. By 1967, the Rock Crusher was available in Corvettes, and by 1969, you could get it in everything from Chevelles to Camaros to Oldsmobile 442s. The sound became part of the mystique. Real muscle car guys didn't just tolerate the gear whine, they were proud of it. It was an audio advertisement that you were running serious hardware. But here's where the story gets really interesting. The aftermarket started paying attention. Part 3. Street versus strip credibility. The M22 created an interesting cultural divide in the muscle car world. Drag racers loved it because it could take clutch dumps and slicks without exploding. You could launch a 454 big block Chevelle at 5,000 RPM, dump the clutch, and the Rock Crusher would just ask for more. Street racers loved it even more. This wasn't just about quarter-mile times. This was about credibility. Automatics might have been quicker down the strip. The TH400 could shift faster than any human. But the M22 had something automatics couldn't buy: respect. Rolling up to a street race with an automatic meant you were either really fast or you didn't know how to drive. Rolling up with a Rock Crusher meant you were serious about the craft of performance driving. The gear whine became a psychological weapon. Other drivers would hear that distinctive howl and know they were dealing with someone who chose the hard way on purpose. But it wasn't just about intimidation. The M22 was genuinely capable of handling power that would destroy other transmissions. Stock Rock Crushers could reliably handle 600 horsepower before you needed to start thinking about aftermarket modifications. That was enough for even the most powerful factory muscle cars. Compare that to early automatics, which might handle 400 horsepower before they started slipping or overheating. The manual transmission guys had a point. If you really wanted to put serious power down consistently, you needed a manual. And if you needed a manual that could handle serious power, you needed a Rock Crusher. But the tribal warfare was just getting started. Part 4. The Rivalry Wars. The M22 didn't exist in a vacuum. Ford and Mopar had their own answers to the muscle car transmission question. Ford's top loader was genuinely strong, maybe stronger than the Rock Crusher in some applications, but it was heavier, and it didn't have the same street credibility among GM guys. Mopar's A833 was legendary among Plymouth and Dodge fans. It was smooth, reliable, and could handle serious power. But ask a Chevy guy, and they'd tell you it was just a copy of what GM did first. The arguments were endless. Which 4-speed was really the strongest? Which one could handle the most abuse? Which one was the best for street versus strip applications? GM guys swore by the Rock Crusher. The gear whine was proof of its strength. The straight-cut design was superior engineering. Case closed. Ford guys pointed out that the top loader was actually stronger in certain applications and didn't sound like farm equipment. Mopar guys laughed at both of them and said the A833 was smoother, quieter, and just as strong without the drama. But the numbers told a story. By the late 60s, the M22 was showing up in more high-performance applications than any other manual transmission. Not because it was perfect, because it was honest. The Rock Crusher didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It was loud, aggressive, and built for one purpose: putting power to the ground without braking. That honesty resonated with muscle car builders who were tired of transmissions that looked tough but couldn't handle real power. Keep watching though, because that story about how it got its nickname, we're not even close to the truth yet. Part 5. Aftermarket Legacy and Modern Relevance. By 1974, the original muscle car era was over. Emissions regulations, insurance costs, and the oil crisis had killed high-performance factory cars. GM stopped making the M22. Production ended, and it looked like the Rock Crusher would become just another piece of automotive history. But something interesting happened. The aftermarket refused to let it die. Companies like Autogear started making brand new Rock Crushers, not rebuilds, completely new transmissions built to original specifications, but with modern improvements. Today, you can buy a Rock Crusher that's stronger than anything GM ever made from the factory. Modern materials, better heat treatment, improved tolerances. Restamod builders discovered that the M22 was perfect for their needs. You could build a 600 horsepower LS engine, made it to a modern Rock Crusher, and have a transmission that was both historically correct and completely reliable. The gear whine became nostalgic instead of annoying. It was the sound of authenticity in a world of modern automatics and dual-clutch transmissions. Classic car auctions started paying premium prices for original Rock Crushers. A genuine M22 in good condition could sell for more than many people paid for their entire cars. But it wasn't just about nostalgia. Modern drag racers still use Rock Crushers because they work. While everyone else is running modern 6-speeds or automatics, there's still a core group of racers who prefer the simplicity and strength of the M22. No electronics, no computers, just gears, shafts, and the driver's skill. The Rock Crusher proved that sometimes older technology is better technology, not more advanced, just better suited for the job. But we still haven't talked about that nickname. And when you find out the real story, It's going to change everything you thought you knew about this transmission. Part 6. The Curveball. The real story behind the name. Here's what most people think. The Muncie M22 was called the Rock Crusher because it was so strong it could crush rocks. Makes sense, right? Tough transmission, tough nickname. Wrong. The truth is way more interesting. The M22 was called the Rock Crusher from the very beginning by Chevrolet and Muncie engineering staff, not because of its strength, but because of the sound it made. Those nearly straight-cut gears didn't just whine. Under load, especially in first and second gear, they produced a distinctive mechanical grinding sound that reminded everyone of rocks being crushed in a quarry. The nickname came from the gear noise. It literally sounded like rocks being crushed. Think about it. When have you ever heard actual rocks being crushed? It's not a smooth sound. It's harsh, mechanical, aggressive, exactly like the sound of those straight-cut gears under full power. The irony is perfect. Everyone assumed the Rock Crusher was named for its strength when it was actually named for its weakness, the fact that it was too loud for civilized use. But that weakness became its greatest strength. The sound became the brand. You didn't need to pop the hood to know someone was running a Rock Crusher. You could hear it from 3 blocks away. The gear whine became a calling card, a signature, an audio announcement that the driver had chosen function over form, performance over comfort. Some old-timers remember the nickname being used as early as late 1968, when the transmission started showing up in more street cars and the distinctive sound became familiar to hot rodders. The name stuck because it was perfect. Not because it described what the transmission could do to rocks, but because it described what the transmission sounded like it was doing to rocks every time you shifted gears. One transmission, one sound, one nickname that told the whole story. The Muncie M22 Rock Crusher wasn't just a manual transmission, it was a statement. A statement that said strength mattered more than refinement, that performance mattered more than comfort, that authenticity mattered more than sophistication. Every gear whine that announced your presence at a stoplight, every hard shift that proved you knew how to drive, every clutch dump that demonstrated your transmission could handle whatever you threw at it. From the 1965 Corvettes that introduced it to the world, to the Chevelles and Camaros that made it famous, to the modern Restamods that keep it alive today, the Rock Crusher proved that sometimes the best engineering solutions aren't the quietest ones. It showed that a transmission could be simultaneously crude and sophisticated, loud and reliable, annoying and beloved. The automatics were faster, the modern manuals are smoother, the dual-clutch transmissions are more advanced, but none of them sound like a Rock Crusher. That gear whine wasn't a flaw to be fixed. It was a feature to be celebrated. It was the sound of honest engineering, the audio signature of a transmission that did exactly what it was designed to do, without apology or compromise. The M22 didn't just shift gears, it shifted an entire culture away from automatic convenience toward manual authenticity. Automatics may have been faster, but the Rock Crusher gave you something more valuable than speed. It gave you bragging rights, and in the muscle car world, sometimes that's all that matters. The next time you hear that distinctive gear whine from a classic muscle car, remember, you're not just hearing a transmission. You're hearing the sound of rocks being crushed, metaphorically speaking, of course.